After Joshua led the Israelites into the promised land, God himself, who had given them his law, they basically lived, Israel, under a theocracy where God himself gave them his law and they were to follow these laws. And yet again and again they disobeyed God. They followed the false gods and the idols of the nations around them. And so God would say, fine, I'm not going to bless you. I'm going to allow you to be conquered by foreign nations or oppressed by foreign nations. And they would go through this cycle during the time of the judges where they would be oppressed by a foreign nation. They would finally cry out to God, and God would send them a judge like Barak or Samson or Gideon or a Deborah to deliver them from the oppression. And then for a little while, they would be doing better, and then they would go back again. And the problem is what we see repeated in Judges 4 times is this theme. It says that in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so they followed their own rules. They didn't want to follow God. And they saw the nations around them had kings. And they said, we want a king like these nations around them. And so God said, fine, if you want to reject me as king, I'm going to give you a king, but it's not going to be a very good king. And so the first king God gave them was a man named Saul. Saul was a big, strong king, a mighty warrior, and that is who God had chosen for their first king. And yet Saul disobeyed God in major ways. And so God said, I'm going to reject you as king, and I'm going to raise up a man after my own heart. And so then he chose David, the youngest in his family, that would be king. And he was basically prophesied that he would be the king of Israel. David's the one who fought a battle with Goliath, a Philistine giant, and defeated him as he trusted God with just 3 smooth stones. And so after David had a son. His name was Solomon. And after Solomon was a very wise king. He sought wisdom, and God blessed him with riches and peace. And so Solomon built finally a temple to God, but then Solomon started following idols and going in the wrong direction. And eventually, through Solomon's son, the kingdom split into Judah, the southern kingdom, and what they called Israel, which was the northern kingdom. And all of these, they had 2 separate kings. And eventually these kings just kept following idols and worshiping idols, and the people would worship idols, and God would send them prophets. And these prophets would be people who spoke for God, who would say, turn away from your sins, stop following these idols, or God is going to send destruction on you. And the southern kingdom, Judah, had a few good kings. The northern kingdom had one pretty good king. And eventually they got conquered by the Assyrians. And about 130 years later, the southern kingdom, Judah, also got conquered by the Babylonians. They got taken away into captivity. The temple was pillaged, plundered, and destroyed. And they were in captivity. The Babylonian captivity was 70 years. But after that 70 years, King Cyrus, who was the king of Persia, because Persia had overtaken Babylon, he allowed them to go back. He allowed them to go back and rebuild the temple of Jerusalem. He allowed them to go back and build the walls around the city so that they could protect it. And at the same time, prophets were coming who were saying that because of your sin against God, you're going to be conquered, but you're also going to be delivered. God won't let this endure forever. God will bring you back as a nation. And so God allowed them to do that. But at the same time, some of these prophets were prophesying about a coming king who would be in the lineage of David. And he was the Messiah. In Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, it says that the virgin will conceive and his name will be called Emmanuel. So he says a virgin, a woman who has never been with a man, is going to conceive a child. Now that sounds a little outside of the biological reality that we normally think about, but this is an act of God, a miracle. He's saying what will happen 700 years in the future, and his name will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. So God himself will become a human being in the future. Later in Isaiah 53, he talks about what this servant of God, what the Messiah will suffer, that he will be pierced for our transgressions, he will be crushed for our iniquities. On him will be laid the sins of us all, and so that he would suffer and ultimately die for our sins. And by his wounds, in Isaiah 53, it says, or by his stripes, we will be healed. And after all of these prophesies, the last book of the Old Testament is Malachi. And after that, there was 350 years of silence before Jesus would come. And that's where the New Testament starts.